know me, I'm Dr. Umar Johnson. I'm a certified school psychologist, doctor of clinical psychology, educator, political scientist, but I'm a Pan-Afrikanist.
That's right.
And great-great-great-great-grandnephew of Frederick Douglass. And what I want to do is I want to talk about how psychology and psychiatry are often used as weapons of mass destruction against us, African people.
I got a special guest on our show today, my brother from Philadelphia, Brother Umar Johnson. Brother Umar Johnson, would you like to introduce yourself to the listening audience and tell them a few things about yourself?
Sure. I'm Dr. Umar Johnson. I'm a certified school psychologist and a doctor of clinical psychology. Also an educator and a political scientist and a Pan-Afrikanist. I work with our young people in the schools. My job is to evaluate children. I decide who goes into special education. I try to fight to keep our young children out of special ed, especially the boys. And special education is being used as a weapon of mass destruction to marginalize an entire generation of males of color, to prevent them from being successful, and ultimately to exterminate them if possible. I'm also trying to educate the community about the psychosexual war against African youth, which is confusing our young people about what and who they actually are. And of course we have the ADHD war and the psychiatric medication and the juvenile incarceration war. So what I try to do is equip our parents and members of the community who care about our young people with the necessary information so that they can fight and protect our people from this slaughter of psychiatric and educational racism.
Yes, sir. Brother Umar, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank
and
you.
Thank you for giving us your precious time.
No problem.
And we're going to get right to the questions, brother,
Sure.
if you don't mind. Brother, in the city of Philadelphia and in the city of Chicago, they say they're closing down the public schools in,
Yes, sir.
in those states. But they're also saying on the other side of it that they're building prisons.
Yes, sir.
Would you like to speak on that, brother?
Very much so. When you look at the history of public education in America, particularly as it relates to African people, you'll find that it was only initiated for us to make sure we had a minimum basic skills education so that our labor could be properly exploited by capitalism. But now capitalism is no longer in need of black labor because they've been able to outsource it to second and third world nations and also ship factories out to the suburbs. So black people are no longer needed in order for the American economic process to continue. So they've decided, since there's no longer a need for educated black people, why not just get rid of public education altogether? The interesting thing about public education is that the Constitution doesn't guarantee anybody a right to an education. The Constitution doesn't even mention the word education. And so education was actually born to die for black people. It was never supposed to be a permanent institution. It was temporary, only around as long enough as we were needed. And because we're no longer needed, every state which controls both the incarceration and the education system have decided to switch their emphasis to educating to incarcerating. So rather than preparing black people for a life of economic investment, black people have become the investment in the form of mass incarceration. When you study criminology and sociology, you find that whenever there's a need for labor, you don't have high incarceration rates. But whenever there's not enough jobs, crime goes up because stress goes up, and also hopelessness goes up and desperation grows up. So there has always been a direct inverse relationship between employment and incarceration. But whenever you hear conversations taking place about black on black crime, you never hear people connect that black on black crime to the economic devastation that black men are dealing with.
Yes, sir. And Brother Umar, I'd like you to speak to the parents that are out there in the listening audience, and maybe you could teach them or tell them how it would be possible to bridge the gap between the natural learning processes of black children and the unnatural learning process of the European on the black child.
Well, here's the thing about education for our children. Public education in America was based on the church model of education. It was the churches that first built the public schools, and public school has stayed true to the church form of education. When you go to church on Sunday, you sit there and there's a pastor at front and you hear a sermon and a whole bunch of other stuff for about 2 or 3 hours, which is fine for adults on a Sunday. But when you are expected to sit still for 7 hours a day, 5 days a week, That's difficult for even adults to do, more or less children. So what we're doing is we're subjecting our children, boys in particular, to an unnatural form of learning. The cognitive neuroscience has demonstrated through its research that children learn best when they are active, when they are up, and when they are participating in the educational process. So if cognitive neuroscience is underscoring the need for an active educational process, how do we justify a system that forces our children to sit still and be lectured to for 7 hours a day? And not only sit still and be lectured to, but be lectured to by a group of middle-class white females who really aren't interested in teaching them in the first place. You cannot separate the educational devastation of black boys from the fact that they're being taught by 93% predominantly white middle-class white female teacher base that could care less whether or not the black boy learns at all. The children of the parents who fought to keep black children out of white suburban schools, it is their children who are now educating our children. So it's kind of ironic that the people who fought to keep us from coming into their schools have now given birth to a generation of white teachers who are now responsible for teaching the children who they fought so diligently against coming into their own public schools.
Can you speak on a little bit about how, because I told you earlier last week when I talked to you that I teach at a daycare, 4 and 5 year olds, and the children seem to be doing fine, and it seems to be, even though they're poor children, economics has nothing to do with the learning process of young children. It has to do with what the parents do to back up that learning process.
Yes, it does.
So what I wanted to ask you was that W.E.B. Du Bois said, no, this is where I wanted to go with that. If I don't discipline my child, if I do discipline my child, then I'm going to jail, right? If I discipline my child physically, then I'm going to jail, right? Mm-hmm. But if I don't discipline my child, then he goes to jail. Yeah. It's almost like a catch-22.
It is a catch-22. Here's the thing with the discipline. One thing the black community has to stop doing is taking direction from people outside of it.
That's right.
We can't let white people dictate to us how we raise our children. We've never done that before, but we're allowing them to do it now. And we actually gave them the authority to do that once we started buying into their psychological and psychiatric diagnoses. See, when we started letting them tell us what was wrong with our children, that opened up the door for them to start dictating how we raise our children. Had we kept our own business to ourselves, we wouldn't be in this situation. But I also want to say this too. I have been a part of a lot of situations where the Department of Human Services has threatened to take children out of the home. And I noticed that they deal with us based on how we deal with them. So if you're a black father or black mother who wants to make it clear to the social service agencies of America that this is my child and this is my house and I'm going to raise them as I see fit, and you do that without no sign of fear of what they can do, they tend to leave you alone. I noticed that the parents who tend to get their children taken away from them are the ones who tend to acquiesce to the power and authority of the situation. So if you're willing to stand up for your parental rights, they tend to walk away from you. But it's only those of us who cowardly back down and allow them to dictate what's going to happen. They're the ones who end up getting the children taken away from them.
Brother Umar, I got something here from W.E.B. Du Bois, and he said that the Negro was born with a veil, but is gifted with second sight. In this American world, a world which yields him no self-consciousness, but only lets him see himself through the revelation of the other world, the white world. One ever feels his two-ness, one as an American, one as an African, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconcilable strivings, two warring ideas, all in one dark body.
What he's talking about right there is the double consciousness, or the post-traumatic slavery disorder that African people continue to suffer from. In his interest, and I actually give him credit for admitting that, because I think W.E.B. Du Bois is the quintessential example of a black bourgeoisie.
Yeah, he was against brother Marcus Garvey,
yes.
Big time.
Yes, he was, and he helped destroy the Garvey movement. You know, not to take away the good of W.E.B. Du Bois, but I think his example, you know, is so symbolic it demonstrates so much of the struggles that a lot of educated black people suffer from today. As Dr. Carter G. Woodson said in his seminal work, The Miseducation of the Negro, the more education you get, the less benefit you are to your people. You actually end up becoming, as Marcus Garvey would say, a black white. as opposed to a black person. And that's why the more educated black people we've had, the worse condition we've been in. The more black elected officials, the worse condition we've been in. The more black millionaires, the more black megachurches, the worse condition that we've been in. Because the educated black person has been transformed into an educated white person who's simply black on the outside. And the interesting thing about the talented 10th or the black bourgeoisie is that even though they work to sell out the best interests of black people and work against our greater need, they tend to consider themselves a credit to the race, even though they do nothing for the race. The average black doctor or lawyer thinks that he should be celebrated by his people, although he does nothing for his people. And I think President Obama is a very good example as well. Someone who has done absolutely nothing for black people, but yet and still wants to be championed as a credit to the people. And we need to be careful about that, because we're raising an entire generation of black children to actually look up to these types of sellouts.
Yes, sir.
And so we're confusing the babies, because on the one hand, we're telling them about the struggle, and we're telling them about Marcus Garvey and El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, but then on the other side, we're telling them about Al Sharpton and Oprah Winfrey and Barack Obama, that these are two different types of personalities. So our children are now getting confused, because on the one hand, they understood the sacrifice of a King and a Malcolm, but then on the other hand, they said, well, Obama never done nothing for black people, neither has Oprah. So if we're going to champion them as celebrities, then maybe it's okay for me to be a turncoat to our community. And if we keep on holding up examples of sellouts to our children, then we can't be upset when they become sellouts themselves.
That's right, that's right. You know, and I was watching something on RT News this week where they had 4 white people on a panel, and they were talking about race in this country, and the first thing they said was the only thing that Barack Obama has done for black children is to make them feel good. That's it. He said, they said if you go into black community, it's the exact same or worse than it was before he got there, and the only possible thing he may be able to do is get his 2 little daughter good jobs.
Yes, and he probably
gotta be a
will.
president.
And that's all. But I think that we have fallen for the hoax. I mean, the house Negro syndrome is as old as slavery. The tokenism is as old as slavery. Choosing a black person to represent the illusion of inclusion or the idea of progress goes back hundreds of years. So when Obama got elected, I was kind of taken aback by how so many blacks, particularly in the revolutionary and the conscious community, I mean, the everyday African is confused and ignorant. But when I look at those who continue or consider themselves to be in the know, I was confused at how so many of them actually acquiesced to the Obamaism and bought into the belief that things were actually changing. I mean, I'm talking about die-hard revolutionaries, not just young brothers and sisters, but even elders who were die-hard nationalists, die-hard Garveyites, die-hard Pan-Afrikanists, you know, who actually bought into the belief that things were changing just because a half-black man occupied the White House.
Yes, sir, brother. Also, brother, with the dropout rate in high schools, is it that these teachers are not giving our children work that's going to make their minds, you know, light the fire of education in their minds, or is it that they putting our children to sleep as far as education? I'm talking about why they're dropping out, because we do know when a child gets on that Xbox game, he plays attention all day long, but when he's in that classroom, he don't pay attention. So that...
2 takes on that. Number 1, there's no such thing, in my opinion, as a dropout rate. There's only a push-out rate. Okay. Children are pushed out by the miseducation and the differential treatment that they receive. In most high schools in this country, a child can be dropped from the roll after being absent a certain amount of days. Okay. No one needs to have to go look for that child. There's no truant officer sent out. There's no investigation. There's no parent contact. They're simply invisible at that point. So there's a high school push-out rate. I've seen principals tell students, even black principals, if you don't want to be here, leave. They tell them to leave, literally. And so we have to recognize that the reason why black children tend to drop out so heavily in the 9th grade is because 9th grade is the year of reality. It is in the 9th grade when you realize that the education that you didn't get from kindergarten through 8th grade has not prepared you for what you're going to need to do in high school. And high school is almost like college, because there's really not a lot of teachers on that level who's going to put the interest and effort necessary to make sure you benefit. So if you can't read by the time you get to 9th grade, you're not likely to be taught. If you can't read by the time you get to 10th grade, you're not likely to be taught. In fact, we know that if you can't read by the time you finish the 4th grade, you're not likely to learn how to read up until the 12th grade. So you can literally go from 4th grade to 12th grade and never have learned how to read despite going through all those grades. So it clearly shows you that high school is not really interested in educating black children. The other thing is, I don't think public school is keeping pace with the technological innovation of American society at large. As you said, you got iPod, Xbox, all of these video games. We live in a fast-paced, technologically sophisticated world. But when you walk into the average inner city Title I public school, you don't see technological sophistication. So you have a child outside of school from 3 p.m. until he goes to bed. If he goes to bed, he's consistently inundated with technological devices. He comes to school at 8 in the morning, stays there until 3 o'clock, 7 to 8 hours, no technology whatsoever. So you're actually revving the brain up from 3 until bedtime. So the brain is constantly being mesmerized by fast-paced colors, sounds, and images. And then he gets to school and all of a sudden he has to put the brakes on his brain. If you study brain neuroscience, you'll find that the brain doesn't function like that. After being revved up, it tends to stay revved up for a while. And even when it begins to come down, guess what? School's out. You go back home to the computer, it revs up again. And so what happens is that the brain has been programmed or conditioned to function at a certain speed. And when they come to school, they expect it to slow that speed down, which is not normal or even healthy for that matter. And so we're blaming children because the school isn't keeping pace with the technological speed of the society. How can the child be responsible for the fact that the school isn't keeping pace with the technological sophistication? If you go to suburban white schools, suburban private schools, they have kept pace with technological sophistication. If you go to some of those high school, college prep classes, the classes are done on computer. The classes are done in HD instruction, all types of modernized pedagogical devices. You don't get that in the ghetto. And so, but the problem with public education is that it has created a system where the child is automatically blamed for the failures of the adults. Public education is the only institution in this country where the student, the customer, is blamed for receiving a poor product.
Yes, sir. And I heard the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan say that a college education is almost like buying a used car.
It very much is.
Once you come off the lot, you don't know what's going to happen.
Very much so.
And the child or the young person, once they leave with that piece of paper, they don't know that they're going to get a job or not.
Exactly.
In this society. Brother, we got a couple of charter schools here in Wilmington, Delaware, and they're predominantly black, but all the children are, what's it called? I'm trying to think of it. Special education.
Okay.
Why is it, how is it that you can have an entire school of black children and all the children be in special education?
Well, charter schools are quite interesting, particularly black charter schools. Not all of them, but one of the ironies of the black charter school is that most white charter schools have some sort of corporate sponsorship. So they're able to get extra money to take care of the different needs by way of white investors on top of the money that they get from the public school. The way charter schools basically operate is the per pupil expenditure that comes with the child to public school is transferred to the charter school's bank account when that child enrolls in the charter school. So if you take Philadelphia, where the children get an average of $9,000 per year, if I have a charter school, when that child transfers to my school, they get about $500 because the public school charges you like a $500 transfer fee. So you actually get a little less than what this public school district gets. But once I get that money, it might not be enough for me to do all the things that I want to do because I'm being taxed by the local school district when they transfer those funds to my bank account. So I need a little bit more money to do the things that I need to do. If I'm a white charter, I got all these different corporations who are willing to donate money to my school in exchange for some favorable advertisement. But if I'm a black charter, I'm not necessarily going to get sponsorship from white corporations or even black businesses in my neighborhood. So the only guaranteed source of extra funding for a black charter school is special education. So believe it or not, a lot of black parents take their children out of public school and enroll them in charter school, hoping for them to get a second opportunity at a better education. But the problem is the child is actually as much as or more likely to end up in special education in a charter school as they did in a public school because the school needs the money. And myself, I do a lot of work with charter schools. I primarily work with charter schools, and I'm telling you, it can be quite a challenge to see some of the so-called Afrocentric educators who deliberately put black boys in special ed when they know they have nothing wrong with them because they're looking for that extra money. So if you take Delaware schools, I think the children get about $6,000 per year spent on their education. If I evaluate one of those children and I classify them as learning disabled or autistic or emotionally disturbed or intellectually deficient or deaf or blind, or if I say they need special ed for ADHD or speech and language impairment, then guess what? Instead of $6,000, the school gets $12,000. On average, it's a 100% increase in the funding, and you get that money every year. So if your child is in the 2nd grade at my charter school or public school, once he goes in special ed, that extra $6,000, that 100% increase, I'm going to get that every year. $6,000 times 10 more years of school is $60,000 extra, because I still get the regular money for him. This is on top of, and that's one kid. What about 1,000 children? What about 100 children? So you see the business aspect of special education. Racism meets capitalism.
Yeah, I'm glad you explained that, because I didn't know about it. That's why I asked the question. I got another question here for you. This was a speech that a brother done in Atlanta. It was called The Challenge to the Black Man, and the brother's name is LeRon Bennett.
Historian, yes.
Yeah, he
was
said,
at the million. I met him at the Million Man March.
Okay, he said, "He who controls images control minds,
Yes.
and he who controls minds has little or nothing to fear from bodies."
Yes.
This is the reason black people are not educated, or why they are miseducated in America. It is no accident that there is a blackout on the black man's contribution to the world and American history. An educator in the system of oppression is either a revolutionary or an educator. I want you to speak on that, and then I'll finish up the rest of the class about a revolutionary teacher or an oppressive teacher.
Exactly. The problem with educators, particularly black educators, is they are caught between a rock and a hard place. If you are a teacher or school psychologist, school nurse, school counselor, social worker, principal, reading specialist, math specialist, whatever your particular responsibility is in a public school, private school, charter school, or parochial school, your contract obligates you to the best interests of the district.
Okay.
So let's say I'm a school psychologist working in Delaware, and they want to put your son in special ed with an emotional and behavioral disturbance.
Okay.
And I know they're trying to set him up because they don't want him in a school and they want to kick him out, okay? If I tell you what they're doing, well, if I go to the meeting with you and say in front of everybody that this ain't fair, nothing's wrong with this kid, he's being mistreated by his teacher, that's why he's acting the way he's acting, all y'all need to do is put him in another class and the behaviors will go away, I could lose my job because my contract obligates me to the best interests of the district. And this is why a lot of black teachers are being fired, because they're working with parents telling them how to protect their children. That's illegal from a contractual standpoint. You are obligated to the district. Your contract does not give you the right to do what's in the best interest of the children. The needs of the district supersedes the needs of the child, even if they conflict with it. So teachers are being fired, black teachers are being fired all across America for standing up for children. That's one of the reasons I resigned from the school district of Philadelphia. My job was not at risk because I was only one of 5 black male school psychologists. And I was the youngest of those 5 and I had a pretty strong reputation. So there was really nothing they could do with me, but I left of my own free will because I got sick and tired of fighting Negroes over our children. And I want to be clear, it's not the white folk in the black ghetto schools that you got to fight with.
Right.
Because most of the ghetto schools are run by black principals. You follow what I'm saying? So I'm fighting black people who came from the same communities as the children they're trying to miseducate.
Unbelievable.
Yes, sir. And it's trifling because it's about money and it's about convenience. And the parents are complicit in it because they're so ignorant about educational process. And that's why one of the things I want to do today is kind of teach the parents a little bit about how you can fight some of this nonsense that they're actually pushing on our children. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote my book, to give our people a guide that they can refer to whenever they have an issue to help them navigate those waters.
Brother, I'm a member of the Wilmington Peacekeepers, and we've been doing a little committee thing where as though we want to have an event for children this summer. We already got a date and everything. Matter of fact, I'm going to give you the date. It's 29th of June.
Okay.
And we would be proud if you was to come on out and speak for a half an hour or hour, brother. But I'm asking you to volunteer your time on
Yes,
this
sir.
right
Yes,
here,
sir.
brother.
Yes, sir. Give me the date. If I'm available, I'm there.
June 29th, and I'll stay in contact with you.
Text me that date.
Yep, through Sister Freedom. But on my last question, I want to ask about the religious aspect of it, because we seem to be so great at building churches, brother. And Jesus says, suffer the little children to come unto me, and that's the kingdom of heaven. Why aren't we building our children, brother?
One of the problems with black people is we suffer from a messianic complex. Slavery put that in us, where we're expecting someone else to come and fix our problems for us because we don't think we can do them for ourselves. Hopeless people always cling to religion. I'm not saying that if you cling to religion, you're automatically hopeless, but hopeless people do cling to religion because they suffer from a messianic complex. And the messianic complex is born of someone who don't think they have the capacity to impact their own circumstance. I remember I was watching a documentary on the Korean takeover of the black hair care industry, and there was a black man who went to the Korean and he asked the Korean, why don't y'all sell beauty products to black people wholesale price? Why do y'all sell it at an individual price? And the Koreans basically said, we don't have to. He said, y'all people build churches and everybody else build businesses.
Yeah.
What we have to start doing is making the school or the business the central institution in the community, and then build around that. We keep on making churches the central institution. And so everyone understand why the religious institution should not be the central institution is because it doesn't put anyone to work. You have to have a solid economic order. And if you have a big church or a big masjid, it's bringing in money, but it doesn't employ anyone. And so when we talk about Jews and Koreans and white folk and East Indians and Arabs coming into our community, robbing us blind financially, well, I would argue that the black church is no different than the Korean corner store. They're also robbing us blind. They put their money into white banks, and then those white banks take the Jesus money, and then they invest that Jesus money in the gentrification of black people, so your Jesus money is actually being used to do the devil's work. So we have to reanalyze how we are actually allowing our religious institutions to exploit us financially in the name of Christ.
All right, we're going to get one more question and I'm going to wrap it up. With these cuts that Barack Obama or the government has done as far as with the kindergarten, the Head Start, and with prenatal care, aren't black parents who have to step up?
Black parents are going to have to step up.
The whole community
Yes,
going to step up. Retired people are going to have to step up.
Yes, they are.
We are going to do this job ourselves.
Yes, indeed. The one thing about the cuts, from my perspective, it should not impact or dictate how we respond to the needs in our community. We come from a place where we did things because we had to with our own pennies, nickels, and dimes. But we have gotten so greedy for the free white dollar that so many of our nonprofit organizations and other organizations are not interested in doing anything for the community unless they're getting paid for it. Now, if you can get a grant, fine. Okay, but that should not stop you from working for our people and definitely for our youth, okay, because you ain't got no money for it. I remember I was in a meeting with a group of pastors, and I asked them why they didn't have a rites of passage program for our young brothers. And they said, well, there's no funding. You know, why do you need funding to spend time with black boys? Why do you need funding to take them on camping trips? Why do you need funding to teach our parents? I don't need any money to do that kind of stuff. I do that at the kindness of my heart. So we also have to evaluate ourselves and how we're letting this individualistic American selfishness begin to control the way we do business amongst ourselves.
Yes, sir. And we're going to wrap it up right here. Brother Umar, thank you for coming on. Yes, sir. And this will be on Tuesday at 4:30 to 5 o'clock. Everybody in Wilmington to see it. This is a book right here. It's called Black Children, The Roots, Culture, and Learning Styles by Janice E. Hale. Right here, I'm telling black parents to buy this book when they get a chance to. And this is another book by Gail Thompson, Through Ebony's Eyes, and it talks about what white teachers don't know about black students. All right, as we leave the program, my brother right here is Brother Umar Johnson. My name is Brother Christopher X. Peace.
It's gonna be Fred Henry singing over to Ali. Bobby Seals, L. Hodge, Malaysia Bass, you repeat. We want some true leaders. Come on, say true leaders. Come on, say true leaders. Now you say true leaders. Marcus Garvey, Mark, yeah, singing over to Ali. Bobby Seals, L. Hodge, Malaysia Bass, you repeat. We need some true leaders. Come on, say true leaders. We want some true leaders. Look, we don't want no plans to import drugs, but they plan on us. We don't own that land, they grow it